Hi everybody, my name is Helle Bank Jorgensen and I'm the CEO of Competent Boards. We help leaders to understand ESG, climate, sustainability issues so they can become better leaders, make better decisions, and the board can really have the oversight of all of the issues that are impacting not only the shareholders, but all of the stakeholders. So basically become better companies, better leaders. And today we are talking exactly about that. And Dov asked me fantastic questions to really understand where is the benefit of becoming a competent, curious, and courageous leader. So stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Find out more. Just go to FullMontyLeadership.com. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? We as leaders, for the most part, are the decision makers. And how much or even what kind of information do you need in order to make the right kind of decisions that are fiscally, brand, environmentally, and corporate sustainability sound? How do you do that? Well, we're going to find out. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Simply go to Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, I want to thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And we're always grateful, and we always need your help to stay relevant. So please get over to wherever you tune into them and rate, review, and subscribe to the show. That's always incredibly important to us. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations every Monday and Thursday across the United States. Also look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listens for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also tune into us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron Podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, think about these terms: corporate cultural diversity, inclusion, corporate and social responsibility, sustainability, B Corps, Green Corps, conscious capitalism, environmental sustainability, pay equality. The list goes on. How can we take these labels out of this vague and conceptual and build them into your oversight and your incentives so that it doesn't just become a cool, quote, marketing tool, but rather a way of doing business? Well, let's find out together, because our guest on this episode is Helle Bank Jorgensen. Helle Bank Jorgensen has dedicated her life to improving how businesses tackle environment, social, and governance issues. For nearly 30 years, she has been behind the world's first green account, later the world's first integrated report on holistic supply chain programs. She has helped many companies, investors, and board articulate confidently and act on the most critical aspects of resilient business. She now educates boards and executives via globally. Now, this is very important. It's called the Competent Boards Certificate Program, and she's going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But the program has received so much positive feedback that it is supported by world leaders. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and help me welcome Helle Bank Jorgensen! Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that fantastic welcome.
You're welcome. Did you hear the crowd?
I heard them. I was almost sitting here typing all by myself, but not by you. So, but you're right. I mean, if you think about it, all of those leaders now that sit there and have all of these amazing careers, but have not necessarily really have the opportunity to dive into what does all of this climate we're talking about means, what does all of this inequality, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so many different things coming at leaders, and how do you really embed that into your leadership and your mindset, basically?
Well, yeah, as I was saying, there is all these things, and the bottom line is, if you are CEO or you're the chairman of the board, there's also a bottom line, and you are held accountable to that bottom line, first and foremost. So before we go into breaking those things apart and looking at them, is it possible, from your experience, from all the work that you do around the world, for the CEO who is sitting there going, yeah, this is all very nice, but is it possible for us to be highly successful with a good bottom line, integrate these things without turning our business completely on its ear and causing massive internal disruption that could bring us down? Because that is oftentimes the fear.
Well, and if that happens, you are by definition not sustainable, right? Because the whole thing is that you want to ensure that that company that you're running is actually a company that continues to provide value, but not only value to the shareholders. You also need to provide value to all the other stakeholders. And if you had asked me this question, let's say 10, 20 years ago, I would say there was more naysayers to saying, yeah, that sounds really nice, but I need to get to the next quarter. We are seeing that is changing quite dramatically. And well, actually this past couple of weeks, we have seen leaders such as Larry Fink from BlackRock, and we also see State Street going out and say, we are going to hold you, dear board members, dear CEOs, accountable for actually embedding sustainability, ESG measures into how do you disclose. And I shouldn't speak on their behalf, but I don't think that they do that because they say, oh, let's save everything. They do that because they say, if you're not taking these things into account in today's environment, with the talent that want to work the right places, with consumers, with all the climate disruption we're seeing, you are not going to survive as a business. So therefore, you better embed this into your business right now. So again, if you had asked me 20 years ago, I would have said, many would say, yeah, it's really nice, but we do that tomorrow. Now, certainly it is, we better do that today, because otherwise I will not have my board seat, or,
So when you say, these people are saying we're going to hold you accountable, how? Because, this is one of the things, let's just take an example right now. It's not a political statement, but it's a great example. And that is, the laws of the Constitution in the United States say that members of the Senate, if there's an impeachment, have to be impartial. The leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, said, I am not impartial. Nobody's going to hold anybody accountable to that, right? It's supposed to be, and again, this is not a political comment about Mitch McConnell. It's just a great example of somebody saying we're going to hold accountability, but it's baked on flaky pastry. It doesn't really stand up to much. So my question around this sustainability in business, what holds it up? Because a lot of the time there's no real laws on any real punishment. And if there is, we're going to fine you. And we've seen this with Facebook and others. We're going to fine you $50 million or $100 million. Like, okay, that's lunch. Here you go.
I'll take those. But I think, you are holding companies accountable. As a consumer, you're holding companies accountable, I hope, as an investor. Right? You are actually, it's in your power to go and say, how is my money invested? It's in your power to go and say, what am I going to buy? Am I going to buy a lot of plastic bags, or can I do things in a different way? So that's kind of like on an individual basis.
Yes.
But when we're talking about the big boys and girls, that's where as I said before, the BlackRock, Larry Finks of the world, the State Street, they say we are going to hold you accountable in terms of when we go and vote for you as your board seat, so the board member's seat. Do we want to vote you? Do we want to have you at the board level? Do we want to say, yeah, you as a CEO should have this pay? So that's kind of like the accountability that they're giving. You have seen examples of employees that's holding their own employer accountable or going on the street. You have seen the talents going to say, if I should work somewhere, I want to work this place or not, right? So it might be a little bit simmy in terms of a law saying, okay, you did this, you did wrong, we're going to sue you, versus all of the other things. But the reputational impact here, huge. And having said that, you actually do have more and more laws and regulations. Well, so it's kind of like a tsunami of things just coming.
Well, it's interesting because you've got, I mean, I am definitely an advocate for vote with your feet and vote with your dollars, right? I'm definitely an advocate of that, whether you're a talent or whether you're the customer. But when the EPA laws are made very, shall we say, diluted, in some cases, completely removed in the name of economics as opposed to environment, then we're at a different place. And a lot of those boards are the people who are saying, we're going to vote based on economics. We're going to vote based on that. I mean, we see that politically right now, as well as, I mean, I'm playing the other side on purpose, right? Because I am definitely a believer in all these things. You and I have talked about that. But at the same time, I want to bring this home very clearly and be the other side for a moment so people can grasp this, because a lot of people are like, yeah, it doesn't, I mean, until your house is on fire, you don't really care about the fire department. But suddenly your house is on fire. Oh my God, why didn't we support the fire department, right? So now the house is on fire, potentially, and maybe it's the planet. But, it's over there. It's not here. So we don't have to worry about it, right? So that's why I'm saying about this thing about being held accountable, even at a law level, is that it seems a little diluted. At the same time, you are going out doing the work you're doing, and you're getting applause and recognition from world leaders. Talk to us about that other side, because we now, it's clear that we've got a side that are turning the blind eye, but talk to us about the world leaders and the companies that you're working with and your organization is working with that are on the other side of saying, you know what, we need to get ahead of this.
Definitely. And the funny thing or interesting thing is that those two things are actually now getting together. So you had in the US, you had the roundtable where a lot of global, US leaders went together and said, are we really only responsible to the shareholder or also to the stakeholder? That's the discussions that's been all over the world, and many places in the world we say, no, we are responsible to the stakeholders, not only to the shareholders. And Davos, the World Economic Forum, you had the Davos Manifesto that also went in and said, we as global leaders, this is what we stand for. So you're actually seeing that divergence between all of these different leaders are coming up. So, but if we think about those, you say that I work with and I've worked with for many years, Fortune 500 companies. Those companies, they see that if in order for them to actually become leaders, become the ones that people want to buy from, work for, put their money in, etc., that this is something that's essential. And to be quite honest, some of them it's when there's been a huge issue, that's where you start saying, as you're saying, oh, the house is on fire, what do? We would never end in that situation again. So how do we put measures in place? But some of them said actually been so much stronger also due to that. So they are building this based on this is not only the right thing to do, but it is the only thing to do if you want to be a sustainable, also in financial sense, company.
Yeah.
So again, if you look at the Fortune 500, they are not only then Fortune 500 for themselves companies, they are so huge. And they have suppliers. And
Yes.
they have all of these. And they are starting to push up in that for a while, actually their demands towards all of those suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you have a tsunami of
Yes.
of demands that's running down to the different companies, and therefore you not only have an impact on your own company, but also all of the suppliers and etc. Think Walmart.
Yeah.
And,
well, you brought up something there that I want to come back to, because I think it takes courageous leaders to come out front and make the point and say, okay, we're going to be focused on the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. And you brought up something that I want to reference here, and I'm actually going to read you a piece in it because I'd really like your insights on this, if that's okay with you. It was the letter from Larry Fink, the BlackRock letter to CEOs, and he said, "Climate risk is investment risk. Over the 40 years of my career in finance, I have witnessed a number of financial crises and challenges. The inflation spikes of the 1970s and the early 80s, the Asian currency crisis of 97, the dot-com bubble, and the global financial crisis. Even when these episodes lasted for many years, they were all, in the broad scheme of things, short-term in nature. Climate change is different. Even if only a fraction of the projected impact is realized, this is a much more structural, long-term crisis companies, investors, and governments must prepare for a significant reallocation of capital." So talk to us about that, because when I read the Larry Fink letter, I was like, first of all, I think that his letter is usually a very important one. It's usually well regarded, but climate denial, it makes my head want to explode. Now, I can go both sides. I've interviewed people on both sides. I can go both sides, and I can say, okay, is there a lot of pessimism? Yes. Is it appropriate? Maybe. What I can say is there is definitely changes on the planet's climate. The argument is whether we are doing it or whether it's the sun and solar flares. And for me, the bottom line is, who cares? The bottom line is, it's happening. So what are we going to do about it? Talk to us about what Larry Fink says there, in the context of this being a very long-term thing that will significantly impact the allocation of capital.
Yeah, so this actually started some years ago with the financial standard boards, where Mark Carney, so the governor at that point of the Bank of England, said this could be a tragedy that we are seeing in the horizon. Because many investors go in and look at this in a shorter term period.
Yes.
And what happens when we suddenly will see stranded assets? So assets that on companies' balance sheet,
yeah,
but we can't really use them for anything. Or what will we see when we see, raising sea levels or other things? So when they started, it was from the financial standard board's point of view, in terms of how do we ensure the economy is not suddenly going down? This was not about anything else. And so Mark Carney, together with, he then appointed Michael Bloomberg to kind of lead a task force, the Task Force for Good Financial, TCFD, the Task Force for Good Financial. Oh my goodness, this is embarrassing.
Okay. It's called cranial flatulence.
TCFD. Good. But
I have it myself.
But in essence, what they now have is this guideline and standard, and that is what you see more and more companies reporting after, where you're starting to look at scenarios. What will this company look like in a 2-degree world, in a 1.5-degree world?
Right.
And where they basically, leaders are starting to say, what happens if? What
Right.
if? And I think that's where you go back to the Larry Fink letter when he said, okay, this is different.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing it, I mean, look to Australia at the moment,
Yep.
the economic impact that will have. You're seeing it in supply chains. You're seeing it everywhere. And the issue is, of course, are you prepared? And are you prepared as an investor?
Mm-hmm.
Are you prepared as the board member? And I think, I'm talking a lot in the book I'm writing, it's a lot about how do you ensure that you have the competence to actually understand that you have the mindset, that you are curious enough to understand these different areas, but also that you have the courage, as you were also pointing out,
Mm-hmm.
to stand up and say, what are we going to do about this? Because many could say, well, it's not going to happen. Many will say it is happening right now,
Sure.
but the big impact, well, it's not really happening right now. So is it better to just wait and see? But when you have that courage and say, no, I now know that this is going to have a huge impact, both a huge impact financially, but also a huge impact on people, on, we're talking climate refugees, etc. That's when you need to then say, okay, what am I going to do right now? Am I going to make a different decision than if I did not know this? And I kind of like thinking of an interview I did. So as part of the Composite Board Certificate Program, we have interviewed so many global leaders that give their insight and their experience. And this fantastic board member, former from Tata in India, was saying, it's many that sits afterwards and say, yeah, I thought about that, but we didn't really do anything. And he said, should be like a mother and a child, right? You would never, ever, ever, as a mother, say, let's wait and see if this is going to if you think there's some problems going on, you would go in and right.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that fascinates.
So we're talking here about economics based on environment, but we talked about all kinds of things here, whether it's the environmental side of it, but it could just as easily be the other sides that that I talked about, which was equality in pay, or pay equality, or any of these things that are there. And one of the things that talking about that, I actually want to bring back to a comment that was made at Davos 2020. Chairman CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, I'm sure you're familiar with what he said. And he said, capitalism as we know it is dead. Now, that is a pretty strong statement from a guy who's, quote, a billionaire. We've got Bernie talking about those kinds of things in the United States politics. We've got Brexit has happened as we do this. The global financial structures are changing. We're going towards a digital currency. That is inevitable, and that is something that the big boys have fought, but you can't hold back that tide either. So we're going to get away from maybe away from these big banks that have controlled everything. So talk to us about what because you're in that mix. You're in a place that most people in business are never going to even know about, let alone go to. Talk to us about this shift in global economics, in this understanding of capitalism in the form that we've known it, because in the form we've known it, it's been outstanding for the few, it used to be magnificent for the middle class in the 50s and early 60s. It did a lot for that. And now in its form, it appears to be failing for the middle and working class. So when Benioff says, you know, capitalism, we know it is dead, what's your thoughts on what you get from the big boys and girls you're playing with?
I think it's a question about reinventing.
Okay.
And you know, it's just saying, you know, capitalism is dead. Long live capitalism, but in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Because you're totally right. If you really think about the way that people years ago, they couldn't buy a share in something and then, you know, get that added value. And I think what's been missing in all of this is what we call externalities, right? So what is the real cost of different things? And if so far we have not really, you know, now we are, but frankly, when I started my career, when people felt like, oh, it's there's something in the air, you built, you know, longer smokestacks. When it was like, oh, there's some dead fish out in the sea because of pollution, that was like, oh, let's have a longer pipeline, right?
Yes.
Hey, frankly, that was how it was. It's not that many years ago, she says.
I remember it well.
Yeah, us with the gray hair, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But if you think about it, that's been the way that we have taken nature as such for granted. Like, oh, you know, we can just put out there and it will just disappear. Miraculously, all of this pollution will disappear. Guess what? It did not, right? And that's what's then suddenly now starting to come back. So if you think about capitalism as a piece, like, how do we embed all of these externalities or these costs, both the positive and the negative side, and put that actually into the balance sheet of companies? And this is where I'm like back where I started my career, because that was exactly what I said. Like, how do we get this into being the integrated report that really talks about not only the financials, but also all of the other forms of capital, and that will inform the longer term financials, and therefore what are all of these capitals? Right now, when you talk capital, you talk money, right? But there's nature, there's biodiversity, there's all of these other forms of capitals, human capital, right? How do we account for them? How do we put them into the mix and ensure that that's part of the whole, you know, that's not just the one silo that you're looking at, but you're looking at all of them, because the other silos are going to impact your financial silo. And then
the aren't we reactive rather than proactive? You know, the recession, the big recession, 2008, 2009, there were many people who saw that coming, who were in power, who had the leverage, who did nothing. They made a movie about it called The Big Short, and at the end of The Big Short, the guy who was the one who really saw it coming and made a lot of predictions about it, there was a piece about him at the end, and it said that all of his investment is in water now, right? And you know, how many years will it be before the world starts valuing water as one of the greatest global risks, which it definitely is? You know, I catch myself running the tap and letting the water run. I live in Canada. I think, well, you know, we've got more lakes than anybody else. But the bottom line is, water is going to become gold in not so long. And you've got companies like Nestle who believe that water is a viable resource, and that, you know, if you don't have it, oh well, you know, you can buy it from us. You know, so I mean, it's just this craziness. This is your work. This is what you do. How are you? Explain to us how you're getting these guys to understand these things that are on the horizon, which is what the environment was 20 years ago, which is what I think in many ways water is 10 years from now. In a screaming sense, it's already there. I know that, but in a screaming sense for the average person. The average person doesn't even think about those things. I have my godson is a environmentalist. He's a big Greta fan. He started his own group. He's doing amazing things. And then he goes to wash his plate in the sink and he just runs the water. And he doesn't think about that because he doesn't know about that. He's fighting global warming and he's running the water away. You don't quite get it yet. So how do we get people away from the reaction? You're doing this, so help us to understand. I know your program's about that, so I want to go there.
And you're so right. We are all good at being, we'll do that tomorrow. Even if I know it, we'll do it tomorrow. But when I start knowing it and I start understanding why, that's where you can. So yes, you're right. The Competent Board Certificate Program. What's fascinating is that it's online. So
Okay.
I have the opportunity to have people from all over the world. We even have people that gets up at 3 a.m. in the night from Australia. So bear with me. All of those will be something for you in the daytime as well soon. But you can see when you have this discussion of different things. We were one of the sessions we were discussing circular economy. And circular economy from the people in Europe is a totally different concept than circular economy if you think from a US point of view. But having this dialogue, suddenly you see, oh, that's a way of looking at it. So you change the mindset of people. So you both give them the competences in order to understand all of these ESG, climate, diversity, tax, as you mentioned, etc. So we cover all of these different areas. But for me, it is really valuable, of course, that these over 70 global leaders, the Paul Pullman, many chairs, etc., are contributing to the program. But it is as much those leaders from all over the world that together, go through the program and discuss it, and therefore learn also from each other. And by doing that, you start to have that, I should actually be proactive. And then I hear back from them and I go like, some gets a board position, great, and can there go out and share the value. Others in their own companies that can help others think a little bit ahead of time, because that's what we want to do, right? We want to think around the corners. You want to think what could happen at that point, because when you are prepared, you're in a much better position than if you suddenly see, I didn't know that my balance sheet, I needed to write that balance sheet down, right? That's kind of like.
But I think that part of it is misinformation and disinformation. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, you and I had talked about in our previous conversation that when Obama was voted in the United States, there were a lot of people, I remember being at the World Business Conference, and a lot of leaders who thought Obama was a socialist. And I'm like, do you know anything about socialism? Because he couldn't be further from socialism. And, Bernie is closer to it, but he's certainly not a socialist. He is a social democrat, but that's different, and people don't know those things. So, and when I say people, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about the guy in the 7-Eleven store buying a Slurpee. I'm talking about the guy who is a CEO, or the lady who is a CEO or a board member, who don't understand these things. So when you say things like socialism, or you talk about circular economics, help us to grasp that, because that framework is so rigid and so black and white for people. It's like, no, we're America. We're capitalists, and it's like, it's like the First Amendment is we're capitalists first. So it's like top of the commandments. There may be 10, but actually there's one that precedes that. It's called capitalism in the form that we know it at all costs.
I think honestly that is changing, and
Good.
and yes, you, of course, if you look at this from a political point of view, but the thing is that unfortunately or fortunately, climate, the nature, do not read the newspapers.
No, and they don't. It doesn't vote.
Yeah. So, well, it kind of like it does vote in its own way, right?
In its own way, sure, yeah.
Because that's
Doesn't care
what you're
about the polls.
seeing. And I think that's where you see now the changes that, yes, it was seen very, very political. And I agree with you. I couldn't care less who done it. But I like to survive. And I think I like to have my child, et cetera, surviving, right? And not only surviving, but actually thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that's called like, well, you can have all the money in the world, but if the only thing you can do is sit and see, something you really will not enjoy. And that was actually his Royal Highness Prince Charles at Davos was saying exactly that
Mm-hmm.
ladies and gentlemen, right? You can have all of the money, but if you only sit there and see the fire, is that what you want? And
Mm-hmm.
you could also see, well, how can a business succeed in a world that fails?
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't see that that's happening. And that's where I think you see more and more and more of the business leaders that go like, okay, either I can sit back and be complacent, and then I can have my grandchildren, like you were talking about, coming up and saying, really?
Mm-hmm.
Is this what you're leaving me? Or
Right.
you can say, okay, you can be complacent, saying, well, hopefully the next generation, or hopefully something else. There are many different ways, but that's where those leaders of the larger Fortune 500 are really starting to then push and say, well, we need, being that for their own views or being that for the views of the stakeholders, we need to see things in a different way. And that's where you see that this change is coming. So I'm rather optimistic, with cautious, but
Sure, cautiously optimistic. Yeah.
but that we are seeing a change happening. And again, when you have the large investors, the BlackRocks, the State Streets, that saying that they are going to look at this and they're going to have this as part of their engagement and the proxy voting, you either can listen or you can wait and see what's happening. So
talk to us about. I mean, I believe you that there is a growth in people and awareness towards this, and obviously they're turning to your competent board certificate program, and that's wonderful. Talk to us about this, what you're seeing on the other side, which is this protectionism that has become, it's put strongmen powers in place in many countries like Brazil that are now destroying the Amazon. People talk about Trump, but you see it with Boris in England. You've seen it in many countries, the Philippines. We've seen it throughout the world. And as we sort of moving away from a globalist thinking and really into his protective tribal mentality that puts a strong man in place. Talk to us about that contradiction to what it is you're doing, because the work you're doing is with people who are really thinking in a global sense, and yet reactively people are behaving in a protectionist sense.
It's so interesting you're asking me that, because that's part of why I actually started this. So I've been advising companies and board of directors for many years, and actually also some governments in that regard. And I have to say that what happened in Paris when we had countries come together in terms of the Paris Agreement, in terms of climate, or what happened in 2015, where you had 198, all these countries in the world going together to say the Sustainable Development Goals. Wow, right?
Mm-hmm.
when you see all of those countries coming together and say, here's something we will work on, super.
Yeah.
However, there's nothing, unless somebody is behind that, and actually, as you said before, holding people accountable,
Right.
it's not going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I started to say, actually, I used to say accountants will save the world, but I started to say, if you look at companies, they are the ones that actually, some of them are as big as countries.
Yes.
And if you look at their reach, they're not only in one country, they are all different places around the world. They have trade with all of these different countries. They are employing people. They are basically constantly all over these different places. And they have stakeholder groups that's not only voting for them in their own country, but all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's a different form. But those leaders that serve at the top of those companies, they're not voted in every 4 years by you and me.
Mm-hmm.
They are if you have the shares, right?
Right.
But they actually sit with this huge power.
Mm-hmm.
But with power comes also responsibility.
Right.
And if they have the insight, they have the competences, and they have the courage needed to say, can we do this in a different way? Can we listen to our stakeholders and really start to have a purpose for the company that will make this company last, that will have my legacy? You can look at this in many different ways, right? It could be the personal legacy, but it could also the legacy of the company. Like that stewardship, that is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And those board members, they are actually the ones that more and more have not only the power, but also the responsibility of having that long-term strategic view, especially because perhaps due to what you're saying, all of what is happening around the world, you're seeing that CEOs have a shorter and shorter time as the CEO.
Absolutely.
So versus the board of directors that are those that should not only have the oversight and hire and fire, some are saying the CEO, but also have the oversight and also have that strategic role. And that's where I think all of this play in. However, many of these fantastic board members, they didn't learn about all of this in school.
No.
As you and I was talking about before, we didn't either, right?
No, of course not.
So by giving them all of this insight and by helping them understand that and see not only like, okay, here it is, but also how can you use it? And this will, frankly, this will give you more money, and this will give you perhaps, even better board positions, and this will give you a lot of other things, right? Including that your grandchildren will come and say, well done, Dad. Right? That's the positive way of saying it, right? So at the moment you have the negative, like if you don't do it, somebody will come, and then you have the positive. And I think what we are doing is bringing, those global leaders that can't sit in every single boardroom. So you can't have the chair of Maersk, the chair of Siemens, Paul Polman, who is now the chair of ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce. You can't have them in every single boardroom around the world. But if you can take their insight and their experience and say, benchmark your own view against theirs, then you can go back to the next board meeting, or you can go back to your CEO or investors or others and say, this is what we could be.
Yes.
And how do we get from where we are to where we could be? And then, as I can tell them that they also will be better financial, they will be better, their reputation, they will attract the talent, It's hard not to go on that. But yes, of course. I mean, it sounds easy.
You brought up two things there that I think that are key points that for me in my work with leaders, with companies, with organizations, and I say that we have the 4 C's. We talk about the 4 C's, but 2 of those C's that I think are mandatory, which is curiosity, the willingness to ask a question when you think you know the answer and be willing to hear something that's not the answer you know, curiosity. And courage, which is the willingness to act upon what it is you know, despite the potential backlash. And honestly, general leaders, and I'm putting that in a general, general leaders often lack that courage and certainly lack that curiosity. They cling to what they knew, and that immediately deflates any potential for courage. So talk to us about, in your program, in the Competent Board Certificate program, if somebody's listening to this, watching this, and they say, this sounds very interesting, what is it? Could you give us a little bit more of a sort of insight into what that program is, and why somebody who is how somebody who is a leader could become part of it or understand what it is?
Definitely. Happy to do so. So basically, together with these now over 70 global leaders, and I mentioned some of them, but it's like leaders from all over the world. So former board member Tata, Unilever, Maersk, Siemens, Air Canada. I could go on, and together with them, including also investors, put a program together with 12 different online sessions, so you do not need to travel, etc. And in that sense, you have a dialogue about issues: ESG, diversity, climate, the sustainable development goals, tax, investment, pay, cybersecurity, all of those new issues that are now hitting the boardroom. But then ahead of time, you get the preparation material. And that's where you get the insight from all of these global leaders that then will help you understand the issue and cases, etc., that can then go from, oh, now I know something about it, to how do I deploy it in my own company? You get a set of questions that you can go back to your boardroom or go back to your leaders in the company or go back to the investors and say, these are the questions that I would like to know. Where are we on these issues? And by doing that, you get the oversight, but you also start to move that company to a better place, if lack of better words, right? And I think that's where you're right in terms of courage. And Paul Pullman, that I've mentioned a few times now, he said the world needs more leaders and trees, right? And because we actually have a lot of leaders, but I think what he meant was courageous leaders.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, if you're courageous, but you don't have the competences, you don't understand the issues, might not be what you want.
Bit of a bull in a china shop.
Yeah. So what are we giving with the program and all of these global leaders that's contributing to the program and participating in the discussion? That is that insight and those way that you can deploy it. So when you have these online sessions where you can ask questions to these global leaders, I mean, what I hear over and over again is that the people that sitting there and can just ask a question to one of these global leaders that you don't necessarily have a conversation with each day, that gives such a tremendous value, and that also gives that they go back and can use that, and it gives actually the courage to go back and say, you know what, if X number of these people, they have had that experience by doing this. Well, maybe we should try it as well. Yeah. So well, that's my hope, of course, that I, by doing this, can share that insight experience, not only from my own career, but from all of these different global leaders, so that we can speed up the process of having more both competent and courageous leaders, and therefore, frankly, hopefully have that your pension and retirement plans and my retirement plans and everybody else out there will suddenly say, oops, there was a lot of stranded assets sitting in there.
Right.
And that's the big fear when you said before in terms of BlackRock and others, that you suddenly will have that catastrophic thing that not only nature is kind of like saying, oops, you're not where you want to be, but your retirement plan. And frankly, nobody's coming to bail us out on this one. So
no, there are so many places that we could go in this conversation, and I love talking about this with you. Obviously, you're very knowledgeable and very informed, and that's a delight. I wanted to talk about the supply chain and which people really don't understand. We live in a world of what is known as fast fashion. As an example, there was a time when 2 years in advance, Paris decided what you'd be wearing. And now there's something called fast fashion, which is something comes out, the photograph is taken of it, and within 3 weeks it's in a store. But there's a consequence to that, and that's slave labor oftentimes. And when I say, I mean, I know because I have these conversations, and I say, is there slave labor in your supply chain? And people are like, what are you talking about? Like, that's crazy. But, really it's not. Take a look and just see that we know that slavery in the workforce is there. And I want to awaken people to that. And we can go to that, and we can go to many other things here. Right? Like I said, we got water, we got economics, we got a whole bunch of things. But where I want to go to right now is from your point of view. Tell us, if you don't mind, if you would be willing to share with us a sort of best and worst highlights, lowlights of trying to bring this forward, trying to awaken this. Who's a company or who you see as that have maybe been part of your program, who have really taken this on and making a massive difference? And you don't have to give away names, but tell us about an example of a worst example where they don't get it or are actually pushing against, or whatever it is that you decide.
Well, I mean, it will not come as a surprise to many in this field that Unilever have been one of those companies that really have been pushing this and have been financially succeeding big time by doing it, but also have been succeeding in terms of customers, in terms of their employees, etc. And so I think that's one. But you actually have so many. I said Walmart before, and somebody loves to hate Walmart for many different reasons. But if you think about, just going back to your supply chain, when they started saying, okay, how can we reduce carbon? And they looked at it and said, what if we look at our supply chain? And then you could start basically by asking your suppliers, more or less nicely,
more or less. You might be out of business if you don't do this. I don't know if that's so nice, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, but to reduce the carbon footprint. And what's come out of that is not only save money, but it's also innovation, right? So that's another good example. Is actually the company where I did the first integrated report in the world for Novozymes, that doing enzymes, and they by using their enzymes, you're starting to see that people can reduce not only the carbon footprint, but you can wash your clothes in cold water, etc. So there's many different ways. I think in terms of you asked, like, what are the negative? And I think, well, we can all think about the examples that's been in the press lately, and where people ask, where were the board? Why did the board not ask any questions? And I'm not going to name any names. I think everybody knows the different companies that's been in the press, and often the CEO have been said goodbye to at some point, and after that, perhaps some of the board members, etc. So, and I think what happens is that it's either, they don't necessarily ask the questions, or they ask the questions but do not verify the information that you get. Right, so trust but verify is one of the things. But if you don't know what to ask, it's hard to ask. Yeah. So one of the things we're saying is that it's difficult to make a well-informed decision if you're not well-informed.
Of course.
Right, and it's difficult.
That's why I was saying curiosity before courage.
Exactly.
Because the curiosity will give you the information, and then you've got to have courage with it. If you have the courage first, then you're just a bull in a china shop, right?
Yeah.
You are, using archetypes, you are what they used to call a red knight. You're going to battle because you like to fight, as opposed to going to battle for something, right? Which is very different.
And I'm seeing you with that red background there.
I'm not a red knight. I'm definitely a black golden knight. It's a different archetype altogether, but I understand the power of red knights. I understand the power of tapping into that ferocity that is needed to make the change. I see Greta Thunberg, but that's what she is. She's a red knight. She's fighting, but she's moving out of the red into a higher level of information constantly, and will, in fact, and is pissing off a lot of people in the process. And I think that's what courage is. Courage is the willingness to piss some people off who don't agree with you. And oftentimes people don't agree with you because of their commitment to ignorance.
Yeah, I think I would also say it's, well, yeah, you could say commitment to ignorance, but I often think it's a question about having the courage to see what is right. And that's hard unless you have the information, right? But when you see that, then be willing to walk that path without necessarily knowing, are you going to be rewarded for that or not, right? To have the belief that this is the right thing to do, and then yes, you can argue, said before, in terms of Unilever, when they come up and said we're not going to do quarterly reporting, we're going to do all of this, we're going to, would they be rewarded or not? Yes, you can always go back and say, see, it worked. But at the time where you really make that decision, I think it's need to look yourself in the mirror and say, can I unlearn what I've just learned? Can I say, okay, now I know? Can I then say that this is not something that you then act upon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think sorry, that's where you start seeing that this competence and courage together, and that's where, in terms of this book, I'm talking about, stewards of fortune, right? How can board of directors in this world where we have so many all these new issues that's coming at them, think both short-term and long-term in the same time? Because you're totally right. If I come and say you have to do all of this, but it costs so much money, you go like, yeah, right. So you need to have that transition. If that is not just from one end to another, but how are you going to do all of these steps? And that's what I'm seeing and hope to see more of course, that the companies, that the leaders that's through the program start to say, okay, what are the right steps to take? Not just, let's just jump everything, because that's not realistic, right? You need to kind of say, what's the best path?
Yeah.
And what are the steps? What are the questions? What is it I'm doing on that path?
Well, I really hope that people reach out to you to find out more about your program and all the rest of it. Listen, Helle, this has been a wonderful conversation. It's been very inspiring for me. Thank you for jousting with me, because it's important. I mean, it's important that we're all open our minds and expand our thinking and be curious and be courageous, so that we can have higher levels of competence at whatever it is that we're doing. Before we finish up, and before I ask you where people can find out about you and the program, etc., I always like to leave my guests, ask my guests one question to leave my viewers and my listeners with, which is, if you had to say to everybody, here's the one piece of practical advice I want to give you, practical guidance I want to give you to put in action in the next 24, 48 hours, what would that be? What would you say to them?
I think I would say, from a personal point of view, think about all the things you're doing, and does that correspond to what you're saying, going back to your example of talking about water and then letting the water run. Yep. But I think if you're a board member, the first thing I would go in and do was ask the question, where are we making our money right now? Are we making our money on products that people want to buy in the future? Or are we making our money on products that perhaps are part of the problem and people do not want to buy? I just had an article in NACD, so the Directors magazine in North America, both having 4 questions that the board can ask management, but also actually 10 steps to be an ESG competent, and what are the governance structure in that. So
wonderful.
So that's a very concrete thing. Look at that article.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, on that, let's please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you and your articles, and obviously the certificate program, and all the ways that, all the wonderful resources that you have.
Well, on the website, which is www.competentboards.com, that's where you find a lot of the information, and of course you're also welcome to look me up, Helle Bank Jorgensen, both on LinkedIn and etc. So that's where we have all our information. There's the Twitter account and all of the social media, and then I'm speaking many places around the world. So hopefully have a chance to meet many.
Fabulous. Again, just repeat that website, and we will of course post it in our show notes for everybody, but just share it again if you wouldn't mind.
So www, so the world web, and then competentboards.com.
Competentboards.com. www.competentboards.com. That's how you can find out more about Helle Bank Jorgensen, and all the fabulous resources. We have been so honored to have you with us today, Helle. I really appreciate it. And for you, dear listener, you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going to either our Facebook or our LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. And when you're ready to develop the leadership loyalty inside of your organization, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com. And to find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or strategist for your organization, you can go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. Full Monty Leadership, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. Full Monty Leadership, because you can't outsource authenticity. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Until next time, again, I want to thank our guest, Helle Bank Jorgensen, for being a phenomenal guest. Thank you so much. We are deeply grateful. And to you, dear listener, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the impact you're having and the impact you can have, and how different those two things can be. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.